Hello and welcome to the 26th Scouching Report for the 2020 NHL Draft. Today we're going to be looking at NHL Central Scouting's 21st ranked European skater Kasper Simontaival of Tappara Tampere. Simontaival was among the league leaders in Finnish under-20 league scoring this season and managed to get himself in a few men's leagues games both this year and last in the Mestis, with some brief appearances with Tappara's men team in the Liiga. He's a pretty classic undersized, speedy, quick winger, but there are some reservations about how well his game might project to not only the NHL, but just the men's game in Finland in general, so let's find out why. So if you've never seen a Scouching Report before, the way that we break down a player is we look at 5 separate categories. Think, move, get, pass, and shoot. Within each one of these categories, we give them a number and a letter grade, where the number indicates the overall tier of talent that I saw across the 7 games I tracked, and the letter indicates the consistency within that tier that I saw. So first we look at the think category, and it's very quickly apparent that Kasper Simontaival is that quick, slippery, fluid playmaking winger that a lot of people seem to really latch onto around draft time. And while his offense appears to be more of a hallmark of his game, I did find him to be a pretty supportive player in the defensive zone and through the neutral zone. Now, he might have been a little bit ineffective in that area of the ice, but it is a really good instinct to see out of a player that does tend to prefer to play offensively. He can support his defensive line mates really well, cover the front of the net more than competently, cutting off passing lanes and tying up players in front of the net. And he has a really solid first few steps, so he's able to pinch out high in the defensive zone to cut off shooting and passing lanes. I also picked up on a number of instances where defensemen on his team might pinch up in the offensive zone, and when those pinches occur, he's able to cover the blue line really well and do what he can to prevent defensive breakouts. So this is an offensive player that I rarely found to be a real positional liability. He's willing to participate in back checks, skate hard, retrieve loose pucks, and use line mates to his best advantage to generate breakouts. On the other hand, though, there were many times where I felt that he could be a little bit too hasty with his passing decisions in the defensive zone. At times I felt that he didn't see pretty clear breakout options in his own end, and I felt much more comfortable with Simontaival rushing pucks out of his own end as well. I also felt, though, that on defensive rushes, when he's participating positionally, I felt that he could lose track of opponents a little bit too often and completely fall asleep at the wheel and get caught puck watching. And with a lot of undersized, skilled wingers who really prefer to play an offensive game, I felt that there were a few too many instances where Simontaival would just take the foot off the gas pedal and just not apply nearly enough pressure as is necessary. But this is a creative player who's able to play a very solid offensive game with great rush instincts both on and off the puck. So in the think category, I'm giving Simontaival a 2D. He's not an extremely high-level thinker of the game, but I do feel that a player who plays as offensively as he does, while also participating in defensive coverages and defensive breakouts as much as he does, is a really interesting combination to work with, and it gives you a number of factors that you can build on moving forward. He's willing to support teammates and chip in where necessary. He's got strong mobility in both offensive and defensive scenarios most of the time. So while there may be some inconsistencies with his puck play in the defensive zone and decision making, his willingness to use line mates to break out of the defensive zone, and his ability to track as many forecheckers as he possibly can on defensive rushes, there are many parts of his game that lead me to believe that he could be a solid offensive contributor without really having to worry too much in a positional sense defensively. Next we go to the move category, and Kasper Simontaival is a classic case of fast, skilled, and fun. He went blue line to blue line in under a second and a half, and he can really get moving really quickly. There's a great combination of skill with his hands at high speeds, as well as using crossovers to go from the outside of the ice to the inside or the inside to the out, which is something that you really need to see in young, skilled, fast players. I did find that Simontaival was a player who tended to stick to the boards a lot more on his rush patterns, and if he's going to be a more unpredictable offensive rush player, he's going to need to use the middle of the ice a little bit more than he does. I also found that at times Simontaival could flat out ignore his line mates while he was carrying the puck up the ice, and he could just put way too much responsibility on his own stick and get himself skating into trouble time and time again. But at his core, Simontaival is an explosive skater with a great couple first steps and a great set of hands to go with it. As is typical, however, with a lot of players with a frame like Simontaival's, staying on his feet and resilient with the puck on his own stick was a weak point of his game. There's all the speed and skill in the world with Simontaival, but once you start applying heavy pressure to him in a 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 scenario, he really didn't tend to fight through that pressure very well. But I think that over time, with more experience playing against men overseas and more time to put strength on his frame, I think these things could work themselves out to at least a decent level. So in the move category, I'm giving Kasper Simontaival a 1D. I think there's some really high-end tools to really like here. He has great puck control when he's going flat out on the ice. He has great crossovers to cover plenty of ice as well. When things don't go right, he covers for himself very well with that same explosivity. And if he can get a little bit more creative with his pressure, evasion, and rush patterns, and if he can build more strength on his frame to be a little bit more resilient to fight through pressure when he encounters it, he could be a really dangerous offensive rush player. With the puck on his own stick, I felt that he attacked relentlessly at times, but fighting through that pressure was a really big issue, and that's only going to get tougher as he goes up levels of hockey. Next, we go to the get category, and I'll start with this. There is a very exclusive club of players who allow control on defensive transitions 2/3 of the time or more. No game I tracked of Simontaival's had a defensive controlled zone transition percentage below 52%, and 6 of the 7 games I tracked were 60% or higher. That will need to improve, especially for a player as mobile as Simontaival. To me, Simontaival is a player who is not strong enough to make a physical impact, and I felt that he would get caught flat-footed on transitions and be unsure of how to use his skating to keep up with that transition. And usually I can find reasons to forgive players for poor pass reception metrics and missing on potential pass blocks, but it really felt like Kasper Simontaival was a player where pucks just bled through him every single game. But on the bright side, as is typical for players like Simontaival, I do see potential in this area to be at least competent, especially when you go back to his positional awareness. He has the speed and the agility to maintain that speed through using his turns, and his pivot ability, if it does come a few steps, should be able to help him adapt to defensive rush patterns a lot easier. And when he settles his game down a little bit, focuses on his more positional play rather than a pursuit attack mentality, he can clog up passing lanes pretty well, and if he can learn to get his stick on those pucks to intercept those passes a lot easier, he could be a better defensive player, no question. But this is a player who is undersized and does suffer from the issues that a lot of people critique small players for. But when he uses his feet and uses his stick to his advantage for a wide stick check and applies pressure to forecheckers, I found that there were times where he was an effective defensive player away from the puck. So in the get category, I'm giving Simontaival a 2D. I found him very similar to previous undersized scoring winger cases. There's definitely potential to be a useful applicator of relentless pressure in his own end away from the puck, and his positional awareness does allow him to get at least in the way of passing lanes, shooting lanes, and rushing lanes, but he was very inconsistent with his willingness to move his feet, and his lack of strength could really hold him back from being an effective defensive player down the road without significant improvement. Next, we go to the pass category, and this is a round where we kind of have to start evaluating Simontaival against a similar type of player in a similar-ish scenario like Robbie Järventie. And in terms of pass attempts, pass completions, and dangerous passes, Simontaival's rate of pass attempts was about the same, but his completion percentage was higher, and per 60 minutes of 5-on-5, he was sending more passes to high and medium danger areas. But Simontaival also was not playing against men. But there were times where Simontaival was terrifically dangerous with his speed and skill and ability to navigate it into open ice and send pucks to the front of the net. He showed great patience at times, being able to outweight defenders, drive wide, and wait for clearer passing options to show themselves. Off the boards, I found that he could be a terrific playmaker both on his forehand and backhand, and do it very quickly. However, once you start applying pressure to Simontaival, that's when you can start to encourage him to make some poor decisions with his passing. He has an inability to deal with that pressure and problem solve on the fly to create that space and get himself into that open space. He has the talent to do so, but under significant pressure that tends to go away a little bit. And a lower pass completion percentage than you might expect really brings me back a little bit to the Jan Mysak report, where there was a bit of an issue using his passing and hitting his targets accurately to generate breakouts out of his own end. He was willing to spot and try to utilize those routes, which is very promising, but actually hitting that tape-to-tape pass under that defensive pressure was a bit of an issue. And another sign of inconsistency here was his dangerous pass percentage as a share of all of his attempts. On the whole, 16.5% dangerous passing rates is about average, but Simontaival had a number of games that I tracked that were at or above 25%, but 3 of the games that I tracked were below 10%. So this is a player that when it comes to passing the puck and making plays in the offensive zone, showed wild inconsistencies. So in the pass category, I'm giving Simontaival a 1D. There were some really interesting flashes of patience and strong playmaking off of the boards all over the ice, whether it's high up in the zone or deep in the offensive zone below the goal line. Simontaival showcased from time to time that he's able to really rush up the ice with a lot of speed and attack the net and get into the middle of the ice. And if he can do that a little bit more often and really keep defenses on their heels, rather than just being strictly a board-based playmaker, there could be a lot more dynamic ability with Simontaival, and I think he has the talent to do it, but it's not quite there yet. Keeping his focus on every single shift with his passing decisions and pass completion percentage is something that will need to be worked on, especially on defensive zone breakouts. Next we go to the shoot category, and again I'm going to bring in Robbie Järventie briefly here. Simontaival did trail Robbie Järventie in overall offensive threat, but he was a better driver of dangerous passes per 60, and he generated dangerous shot attempts off of his own stick at 71% the rate that Robbie Järventie did. And over the course of this season, he scored 10 5-on-5 goals, and 5 of those goals came from high danger, but in my sample, only 13% of his shot attempts came from high danger areas. And adding in medium danger shot attempts, having 47.8% of your shot attempts come from dangerous areas for a scoring winger is probably less than what you'd like to see. And Simontaival certainly has the speed and skill to attack hard and drive the middle of the ice pretty well. It just is something that you don't see very often. He preferred to stay wide along the boards and act more as a playmaker off the wings, cutting in when the puck wasn't really on his own stick and getting his shot attempts from there. So with Simontaival, I'm not really sure how his goal scoring will project without more of a willingness to use his speed and skating to get to the front of the net with the puck more and get more shot attempts off from more dangerous areas, because it seems like those are the areas where he's scoring from, but as a share of all of his shot attempts, he's not getting there enough. So in the shoot category, I'm giving Simontaival a 2B. There isn't really a tremendous amount to be picky about, but there isn't a tremendous amount to be particularly thrilled about. He shows good off-puck offense with an ability to drive to the net that way and generate shot attempts, but he trails a large amount of the pack of forwards that I've tracked this year in a number of pivotal offensive metrics. Of 57 tracked forwards this year, he currently is 39th in individual high danger shot attempts per 60. He's 42nd in individual dangerous shot attempt percentage, which is the share of all of his shot attempts that were dangerous. And individual dangerous shot attempts per 60 wasn't much better at 40th. So if he can get stronger on his feet and attack the middle of the ice a lot more often with the puck on his own stick, which I know he can do and has the talent to do, then I think these numbers will improve and he should become a better goal scorer. But I still don't really see him as a premier goal-scoring option down the road like someone like Robbie Järventie. So the way that we wrap up these reports is we look at the best part of a player's game, the good part of a player's game, and the not-so-good part of a player's game. The best part of Kasper Simontaival's game is the combination of speed and puck control. He can be a dazzling player at times, and I am not surprised that he is a junior-level scoring champion and one of the very high-end Finnish prospects to come out of that country in the last few years. He can be a relentless attacker that keeps defenders on their heels, and he has a great ability to use the boards and push play up the ice to generate dangerous chances for his line mates. On that note, the good part of his game is his potential as a playmaker off the boards. I really did feel that that was a very, very positive part of his offensive game. His dangerous pass rates, while notable at best over my whole 7-game sample, if I'm going to stay true to my word, I have to trust players when they show me what they are at their best. And if Kasper Simontaival turns into a player where a quarter of his pass attempts are dangerous, there could be a very dangerous playmaker there. Over that 3-game stretch where there was a 25% or more dangerous pass percentage, per 60 minutes he was sending 17 passes to dangerous areas. Those were games 4 through 6 that I tracked, including one game that was in the Mestis, so there are signs of improvement, but he is going to need to build on that confidence, be a little bit more dynamic in his rush patterns, and build some strength on his frame if he's going to bring that every game. The not so good part is a little bit nebulous. I constantly looked at Kasper Simontaival and wondered, is it enough? Don't get me wrong, there is a ton of talent with Kasper Simontaival, but his inability to deal with pressure and his inability to use the middle to generate shot attempts for himself and his inconsistencies in his playmaking really lead me to believe that this is a slow burn that may never ignite. If he can learn how to problem solve and bring his A game every single shift and get stronger on his feet, then he absolutely could be a very good offensive player down the line. And while he's speedy and skilled and tons of fun to watch when he's really cooking in the kitchen, when there was pressure applied to him, more often than not, he tended to buckle a little bit. He's a clever playmaker, but it was remarkably inconsistent. He's a competent positionally defensive player, but again, that was also inconsistent, and he did lose track of opponents more often than I'd like. So overall, I'm giving Kasper Simontaival a 1F. As much as I am a fan of undersized skill wingers and guys who might be flying under the radar, I have to recognize when players who are undersized and speedy and skilled do have limitations that I think really will hold them back in their development. And I found when Simontaival went up to the Liga both last year and this year, his weaknesses really get exposed. This is most definitely a player that will need time to work on his strength, resiliency, consistency, and confidence in order to be a reliable and competent defensive player who can flex the offensive talent that he has. Having all the speed and skill in the world won't really help you if you're not reliable as a passer in your own end, or if you are but inconsistent in that skill, that's another way to lose minutes in a coach's eyes, or if you come as advertised as an offensive player but can't get your shots off from medium or high danger areas. He's a skilled offensive winger with a ton of speed, but in a similar range of this year's draft, Ronnie Hirvonen may very well be available, who is a player that has played at center in the Liga and been there all season long. And against men in the Liga where Kasper Simontaival has struggled, Ronnie Hirvonen put up an equal amount of offensive threat as Simontaival did. So all of these things being considered, I would not be surprised to see Kasper Simontaival slip a little bit further than most people might think in this year's draft. He's got the mobility and aggressiveness to shut down transitions, but pucks seem to bleed through him far too often. He skates himself into pressure scenarios and doesn't really problem solve to get out of those situations and turns pucks over. He can drive wide with a ton of speed and make plays off the boards with the best of them, but doesn't really use the middle of the ice as much as I'd like, and he can be somewhat predictable in that regard. And if he's drafted by your team, you might see highlight packages of him and get really excited about the potential of this player. But in my view, this is a player that will need some time to develop and learn how to play against men and adapt to pressure and put some strength on his frame to build up some resiliency. He has all the tools to play with tons of confidence and swagger and both score goals and set plays up for his line mates. And I am somewhat optimistic that down the road it will work out. But in my view, this is a player that's going to be in Finland for quite a while, slowly working his way up the ranks where he's at least able to become a consistently competent defensive player, which would enable him to play more offensively and be more effective, especially with that added confidence. And at the end of the day, I think there is a chance that Simontaival could morph himself into a very strong and exciting offensive winger. So that's all for this Scouching Report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could join us on Patreon or here on YouTube, where you get access to a Discord server, merchandise discounts, data sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted NHL prospects, and plenty of other goodies. Or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and thanks for watching.